Hi everyone, welcome to the launch of Ernie Tate's book, Revolutionary Activism in the 1950s and 1960s. I'm Greg Albo, and just from the Center for Social Justice and Socialist Project, who are hosting the event today. I'm just going to say the book is a fantastic read. Anybody who knows Ernie, I've only known Ernie for the last decade, so I didn't know a lot of this history except by innuendo, largely, since I had never been part of the Trotskyist movement, and sometimes slander, and it was very good to read a book that was telling the story in a different way from an insider account. It's like Ernie, full of stories and strategy and tactics running through the book. So it's just a terrific read, and we're really glad to be here tonight to help sponsor and launch this book in Toronto, following up on a launch that was done in the fall. In London. In London in the fall. I'm going to turn it over to Carolyn Egan from the United Steelworkers and the International Socialists to chair the meeting and.
Thanks very much, Greg. And I'm very pleased to be the meeting. I was delighted. Ernie and I guess have known each other for many decades. We're all within the Trotskyist tent, but from different tendencies as the years have gone by. But I have a tremendous admiration for the work of Ernie and Jess, of course. And I will say, and I just reminded Jess numbers of years ago when we were on a bus going up to Ottawa for many of the pro-choice, reproductive justice demonstrations that have taken place in this country, she surely did try and recruit me to the LSA. That was a long time ago. It didn't work, but nonetheless, here I am in the IS. So I think we're going to have a really rich discussion this evening. Ernie is someone, of those of you who have read the book, and those of you who haven't, have a wonderful treat. He's in many senses a working class hero in my mind. He's been true to the revolutionary tradition from the start of his political life till today. You'll find incredible stories of what has gone in the past, and I think great lessons for what can happen in our future, and I think certainly an argument for the need for a revolutionary left. So I'll introduce the speakers and call them one by one. There'll be a chance to ask questions after all the speakers have finished, and Ernie will be ending up. The first, and I'm going to give each a little introduction now and then introduce them later, Chris Schenk, who is currently teaching labor at the University of Toronto. He was previously the research director at the Ontario Federation of Labour and was a member of the LSA, the League for Socialist Action, for you who don't know. You certainly want to leave room for comments and questions and discussions at the end, because so many of you here have such rich histories as well. So we'll begin with Chris Schenk, so please welcome Chris.
Thank you very much. I want to begin tonight by just sort of setting the context in which Ernie's books begin. And I think I can do that by a quote from Ross Dowson that Ernie used. So Ross writes, "We had hoped the post-war revolutionary upsurge would result in the advanced workers deserting the CCF, bypassing the reformist stages in their development of political consciousness, and move directly to the recognition of the need for a revolutionary vanguard party." Now, of course, he had hoped that because Trotsky and many others thought that given that we've got another war here, 20-odd years later, various worker upsurges, and we've got at least a deformed worker state, if I could use that term, that there would be some revolutionary upsurges at the end of World War II. That wasn't the case as we know it. We had a post-war boom, and we had a very conservative political period given what in North America we often just refer to as McCarthyism. And we also had the triumph of what those of us in the Trotskyist movement would call Stalinism. If you remember, a whole number of states were, in fact, under the hegemony of the Soviet Union, whether or not there were a majority of workers in those countries that wanted it. So this is a very different period, and this means that we have a very small left, a left that is quite isolated, a left that has to work at any kind of victory, a left that has to try to stay alive, but nevertheless has a story to tell and had some small victories here and there. So I guess the limited successes are as interesting as their difficulties. So this is what Ernie's book's about, and this is the context of his book. The book does not intend to cover everything that went on in the post-war period in the 50s and 60s. It follows rather the contours of Ernie's own experiences, which I think is as it should be. Which means that while it covers all kinds of things, it doesn't cover so much the youth radicalization that came. It doesn't cover so much of the feminist rise of feminism, although it does talk about Pat Schultz and her role in terms of feminism and in terms of the daycare movement, which is great. And it doesn't speak that much to Quebec, but if you can think of 1,000 other things that they're all covered. I think one of the first things you'll find is that political life in this period was very difficult. The movement was very small, people were very poor, their dedication is incredible. People got jobs, and Ernie is one of them that went from one job to another over the years. Often this was where the movement saw political opportunities. In other words, where were workers in struggle? So you either joined their picket lines, or you got a job there, or whatever you could do to try to engage and help in that struggle. The interesting thing you'll find is that Ernie gets let go, shall we say, from a number of places. And I thought, surely that's going to be for political reasons. Well, very indirectly, given how long he worked for the movement, it often meant that he didn't get to work on time. So there were other reasons why Ernie sort of didn't quite make all these issues. So let me just get to some of the issues. But in doing so, I want to just say that there's all kinds of people whose names many of us know. I don't know all of them, but there are a lot of names that I know. And their lives in the movement are very interesting. Some of them I didn't know who played a key role. Some of them I did know and didn't know they did all those things. But that's very interesting. But let me focus on a few issues. One of them is sort of Ernie comes across as talking about the sort of conscious strategy of building an organization. So how do you build a small organization? And in part that's looking at where there are struggles, trying to intervene in the struggles as best you can. In many cases that didn't go anywhere particularly, except that maybe more people got your newspaper or knew who you were, etc. In other cases it went a lot further. Part of that strategy is to, in your intervention, is to try to show that you're trying to help the struggle, trying to make sure it's successful. And also, if you're a skilled political person, which many of these people were, you can show by example how to do certain things. And in some cases that led to people admiring you and supporting you and joining the Trotskyist movement. Another interesting way they built the movement was cross-country newspaper tours. Now some of you people that have been around for a long, long, long time would know that they did cross-country tours selling Workers' Vanguard at the time. Right? And lucky you, you're on tour from here to Vancouver, and the only money you've got is by selling the newspaper, which can be a fairly difficult thing to live on. And they often lived in one van, for example, and this led to some interesting situations. The one that Ernie talks about there, where is Ernie's phone? Okay, yeah, he's got something ready to poke me. Not really. But I mean, there are some interesting personality issues. There's personality clashes, of course, in small organizations. So we get a tour across the country led by Patty Stanton and Jim Mitchell. And about halfway through the tour, Jim Mitchell quits, takes the train back to Toronto because the two of them aren't getting along. And these are the kind of issues that you do get to in a small organization. Okay. So I think the whole conscious strategy for building an organization comes throughout as almost a theme in the book. Let me go to another one. Working in large-scale or mass parties like the CCF, NDP. There are a number of benefits for working in a large organization. And let me just say a couple of them, and I'll say a couple of the negatives too. One of them is if you're small and isolated, where do you meet workers? Where do you meet sort of a left opposition perhaps growing up, or a left caucus in the CCF? And obviously you're not going to do it just by your own self, so you get involved in the CCF, and there's a number of great things about that. Great might be a little bit exaggerated, but think about it for a minute. There's municipal elections. So what is your position as a revolutionary socialist on a particular municipal election? Which might be dealing with education, healthcare, it might be dealing with sewage. There's a whole number of things that you have to come to grips with, like transit is another one. Provincial elections, like we just had, federal elections. So in many ways, the small Canadian organization had to look at various arms of the state and figure out what our position should be on that, and try to intervene in a way that was understandable and made some sense to people. What are the difficulties? Well, I think we know those. Social Democrats think that only they should be in mass organizations, and so they make it as difficult as they can for those on the left, up to and including expulsions. So there are a number of lessons there that I think are interesting for us. Let me move to another one, and that is the Teamsters. Of all the unions in the world, the Trotskyist movement actually did recruit out of the Teamsters Union. Never my first choice given my long-time history in the trade union movement, but nonetheless, it was a very interesting period. The group had success in fighting the Hoffa-led bureaucracy and their rigid top-down control. The Ontario government, that is really the Labour Relations Board, forced elections on the trustee local, providing an opportunity for intervention. Members intervened and were key in organizing Fight Back caucus called the Forward with Democracy caucus. They also had a Forward with Democracy newspaper. So there's a whole thing in there about a number of strikes, some real explosions in the workforce, particularly in various areas where there were truckers scattered throughout the city, not totally under control of the local, and who in many cases spontaneously virtually rebelled against their situation. So there's a whole section in there about a number of Teamster actions. In the end, believe it or not, this small group recruited 35 to 40 new members. Now this is interesting. Think about it if you're a dozen, 20 people, probably closer to 15, and you recruit 35 to 40 members. Now, the problem there was that I guess it was the LSA by that time, was unable to integrate these new members very successfully. So who are these people? These are people that are generally married, have partners of some kind, they have kids, they have a house that has to be looked after, a lawn that has to be cut, they have all their union work, and now they're supposed to come into this small group which worked at a fairly relentless, fast pace. It was a very all or nothing organization at this time. So I guess that one of the questions I would have for us, for Ernie I guess, but certainly for all of us is, don't you think that to even have a chance of keeping these new members, the style and pace of the organization would have to change? That is, wouldn't the pace of the organization have to slow down a little bit? Wouldn't a tremendous amount of educational work and patience be needed in order to have even the slightest hope of keeping these people? What about a social life? What about a social life that includes their families? So there's a number of questions around here, and I'm not sure what all, if any, changes were going on in the organization, but it was pretty difficult, or it was pretty impossible to hold on to these new members at that time. So if there's comments on that, fine. Again, I guess, okay. So just to keep things moving along here, I wanted to talk about one more issue. There's certainly a lot of issues to talk about, But that is, I thought, an interesting one of personalities. Now, when I was active in the LSA, the issue of personalities really didn't come up much except in side comments about some event. Someone was too hot under the collar or whatever it was, but it was just sort of a peripheral interest. But Ernie makes the point that he says in his intellectual and political development that Ross Dowson stood head and shoulders above everyone else, but while playing an absolutely pivotal role in the development of the group and helping save it from extinction, he was also a liability in that his personality and the peculiarities that flowed from it could be extremely damaging. So I thought, again, this is something to think about for those of you that were in the movement, and perhaps that could be an issue that we discuss later on. So I'm going to leave it here and let Richard take over.